Next, we're going to talk about this new Tucker Carlson interview. And at first, I didn't even want to give this any oxygen because it's so absurd. But I think that it's worth talking about here because it's going to get oxygen no matter what we do. And I think there's some incredibly important context that people need to have before the full video airs. When I saw this going around on Twitter, Tucker put out this clip teasing this interview with a guy who says he had sex with Barack Obama. I'm like, what? I'm like, wait a minute, that guy looks familiar. Is that Larry Sinclair? This absolute notorious fabulist and liar and con man from back in 2007, 2008 days. And so I think Tucker has not put out the full interview. Maybe Tucker includes all that context and dismantles him by the end of it. It's not what it sounds like from the trailer that he put out. So play a little bit of that, and then we'll talk about who this guy Larry Sinclair is and why it's important that we understand what his backstory is, since this is probably going to get tens of millions of views on Twitter, or if you believe that counter. But even if you don't believe the counter, you think it's inflated by 10, it's going to be a lot. And so let's roll a little bit of this clip.
You're just a guy who's in town for the night, and it sounds like you're looking to party.
Yeah. Pulled up in a bar outside, and there's this guy that's introduced to me as Barack Obama. I had given Barack $250 to pay for coke. I start putting a line on a CD tray to snort, and next thing I know, he's got a little pipe and he's smoking. So I just started rubbing my hand along his thigh to see where it was going, and it went the direction I had intended it to go.
Even though you had sex with him twice, you did cocaine with him, watched him smoke crack twice, you had no idea who he was.
I had no idea who he was.
Let me just ask the obvious question. What was Obama like on crack? Is it your sense that that's who Obama is, just transactional, or that he's bisexual, or like, what is this?
It definitely wasn't Barack's first time, and I would almost be willing to bet you it wasn't his last.
The guy's running for president, and credible information comes out that he's smoking crack and having sex with dudes. That seems like a story.
Well, it would be a story if the media really cared.
I would hope that people could see that and just see how little sense all of it makes. Like he gave him $250. Like they meet outside a bar, all of a sudden he's giving him $250. Then somehow crack shows up.
Yeah.
Like just the details on its own don't make sense. What, didn't he go by Barry at the time, not Barack? So this is inside the four corners of the guy's story, and the best parts that go up, like to me, it's not credible, like not making sense.
From the trailer.
From the trailer.
And he's dropping the interview, what, Thursday? So tomorrow? Is that what it
That
is?
sounds right, yeah. But now Sinclair himself basically spent most of his adult life in and out of prison for fraud and for lying, for writing fake checks, for all sorts of other, like,
Stealing tax returns, forging signatures.
Yeah, con man type crimes.
Yeah.
If you notice the byline on this, Ben Smith, my old colleague at Politico. I was at Politico.
The Politico.
At this time, the Politico. His attorney, or I don't think you'd call him attorney, you had to call him spokesperson because he'd already been disbarred at this point. At the time was Montgomery Blair. Montgomery Blair Sibley, who people can kind of Google him too, just an extraordinary kind of figure in our politics, like this, like gadfly. He represented the D.C. Madam, and I worked with him on a story back in 2007. So that's another reason I remember this, which involved me like calling him and him answering the phone. Like that's what I mean by working on the story. And he said a couple funny things, and I quoted him. He also told, and Ben has this in his story as well, he told a judge in 2004 or something that he couldn't show up for sentencing or couldn't show up for his trial because he had terminal disease. That was 20 years ago. Clearly he's still alive.
Yeah, I forgot about that part too.
Like you couldn't, and he also, he booked the National Press Club during the 2008 campaign trying to get the media to pay attention to him. And it didn't work because he was never able to produce anything that could even remotely show that he and Obama were even in the same area at the same time.
Right.
Like you have to have something.
Right.
And so not only did he have nothing, no corroborating witnesses, no people that he told over the years, if you were trying to construct the backstory of a non-credible person, you couldn't do better than this guy. who's just who's been charged so many different times for crimes related to lying and deceit.
It's not a good start. It's not a good start. And the other thing is,
so that's why I wanted to talk about this, because I think as kind of untoward as it feels to even air those allegations, they're going to get aired. And I'm curious if your take on this. I think it's a cynical move by Tucker Carlson here, because he understands that in 2008 there was the internet. He did put his stuff on YouTube and it got almost 1 million views or something. But the mainstream media and the conservative media as well was still playing a gatekeeper role. And,
yes.
and there are good elements and bad elements to this gatekeeping.
Yep.
And I think Tucker knows now that the gates are off, and that he's going to be able to, like, basically put this into the bloodstream, and tens of millions of Americans are going to believe it without ever knowing this backstory. I mean, maybe he'll put it in the interview, but a lot of people won't even get to the end of it.
And here's the interesting context. This is why I think the Barack Obama, this is like we're going into the 2007, 2008 fever swamps where there's all kinds of stuff circulating. The primary, there's plenty of dirty tricks being played by the Clinton campaign. There was plenty of wild stuff coming out of, even conservative Oppo dives, like
Clinton
crazy.
Oppo dives.
Yeah, Clinton Oppo dives, like crazy stuff was circulating around back then. Because Barack Obama's had like an interesting life. He lived in all kinds of different countries, and he was a new type of politician that, was like, first of all, he had been a senator for a couple of years, and people were trying to vet his record, and some really crazy stuff came out of that. I can't imagine what it was like to start covering some of this stuff back in 2000s. It must have been wild.
I think it was Ben Smith who had the story that a bunch of his friends came out and publicly said that Obama was inflating his drug use.
He was like, I actually remember that.
It was the first presidential candidate in American history
bragging,
who was maybe falsely elevating the people were like, Coke? Barry? I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, smoked a lot of weed, but.
And now we have Kamala Harris like on Breakfast Club being like, oh yeah, I smoked weed. And
listen to Snoop.
Charlamagne being like, when? She's like, I was listening to Snoop Dogg.
That's right, so she's the second. Yes, and Snoop wasn't even like signed to a label yet at that point. Yeah.
Right. So the reason that this has become, like sort of bubbled to the surface of discourse again, I think is in large part from this Tablet magazine interview that David Garrow, who's Obama's biographer, gave in early August. And he talked about in his book, and the story just did get kind of buried, that, I'm reading from a letter that Obama wrote to Alex McNear in November of 1982. Quote, in regard to homosexuality, I must say that I believe this is an attempt to remove oneself from the present, a refusal perhaps to perpetuate the endless farce of earthly life. You see, I make love to men daily, but in the imagination. My mind is androgynous to a great extent, and I hope to make it more so until I can think in terms of people, not women, as opposed to men. But in returning to the body, I see that I have been made a man, and physically in life, I choose to accept that contingency. Now, that letter is I think it's actually it's in the Emory University archives. They don't let you take pictures, they don't let you take it out, but Garrow's friend transcribed those paragraphs by hand. He wrote them down himself and then gave them to the New York Post. It ended in, and Garrow's a Pulitzer Prize winner. It ended up in Garrow's book. People didn't notice it when it came out in the book. It seems like
it's a 1,000-page book.
It's a 1,000-page book, and it seemed like that Tablet article, which was also like 1,000 pages, is what got people to pay attention to this because everyone started excerpting it on Twitter. And so the bottom line is, people are gonna be like, first of all, why does it matter that Barack Obama sounded like Judith Butler when he was writing to a girlfriend in 1982? And what does it matter if Barack Obama was gay? I feel like that's pretty much what the public is going to say, other than the fact that there's some intrigue to the idea that, whatever. There are questions of why, the corporate media didn't dig into all of this, the letter, where was the curiosity about this? Because it does seem strange for a man who's married to a woman. But then you get back to the bottom question of, who cares?
Oh, right.
Again, who cares? But I think that's why Tucker Carlson, to your point, every interview that he's done so far with Tucker on X, which I still think, like X itself, is in this flux transition period, has been essentially not like perfect, this like immaculate manifestation of journalism, but a giant middle finger, intentionally a giant middle finger to the gatekeepers. I think that's very intentionally what he's doing, and saying, look, if the media didn't want to touch this, despite having an actual letter itself that Emory University is not letting anyone, but if they don't want to touch it, I'm gonna have fun with it, and screw you guys for not doing it. An understandable sentiment, I will say. I'm not sure that this is the best use of Tucker's time, though.
Yeah, I can only imagine he sees that tablet thing. He's like, oh yeah, there was that crank back in '08. He said he hooked up with Obama. Let's see if that guy's still alive. Said he was terminally ill. Oh, turns out, aren't we lucky? That was a lie.
Yeah,
he's still alive.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's like you read Obama's letters from that period, from the early 1980s. They're all dripping with that philosophical. You can just feel it's early 20s. Men working through what it means to be a person in this world, and this was the period when letters were still a thing.
Yeah, you had to put everything down in writing.
And there was there was kind of a cachet to being able to write like these kind of profound sounding letters. And people were kind of working out their identities through their letters. Mm-hmm. That's something that's basically gone. Now we're doing the same thing, but through like TikTok or Twitter or whatever.
It's a shorter form too.
Yeah.
It's more snippets than,
right.
You have to sit down and be really deliberate if you're writing a letter, as opposed to when you're just like firing off a text message.
Yeah, but for hundreds of years, this was the thing that young men and young women would do. They would just write these like super purple letters, exploring like the deepest thing. He's like the philosophers and writers that he name checks in these letters is just absurd and over the top.
And I think I think one of the big like narratives that this is framed within is that there were things about Barack Obama that people felt like were, what's the word? I mean, he definitely was a new type of politician. And I think some folks felt like the media kind of glossed over some of these things that, like, if you go back to Jeremiah Wright and Bill Ayers and Obama coming out, like genuinely coming out of the left in a way that I can't think of another like super mainstream politician maybe the only other example would be Bernie Sanders in 2016. And Obama wasn't static. He changed after he came out of the left very clearly. But he did have a huge sort of, his genesis politically was in the organizing areas, the organizing community in Chicago of the left. And that was intriguing to a lot of people, and they felt like maybe didn't get quite the attention it deserved in the media.
Although it shows the paucity of the left at that time, and it was kind of like the Harvard law firm left. Like the community organizing was done in like, and Garrow gets into this in the book, in kind of collusion with like these law firms, and like it's not that the kind of it's not the Black Panthers.
Right.
It's a much different type of community organizing going on.
The aging Black Panthers, like the post.
Well, he ran against Bobby Rush. He ran against Bobby Rush, who was a leading Black Panther.
But before that, yeah.
And then he was very big into the anti-nuclear movement, anti-nuclear proliferation. That was a big niche issue for the left, because they cared a lot about Latin Central America. Like because of Reaganomics and Reagan, like they had been so severely routed in the kind of New Deal and anti-war stuff that had kind of fueled what was a left, but there wasn't much left. It was like this
of the left.
Yeah, how much was left of the left. And so yes, he comes out of that, but it's a much kind of weaker and kind of more elite aligned movement.
Yeah. I mean, he's just a fascinating figure. So lots for David Garrow to work with, regardless. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.